Human beings have always been concerned with questions of morality. How should we live in this world? Common tropes throughout history have been of right and wrong and good versus evil. To me, and to many others, this seems to be one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves. How should we live in this world? Now, there are only a few ways to actually approach this problem, two of which I will explain shortly. The two most popular areas of discourse on morality seem to be religious objective morality and moral relativism. Religious objective morality is generally based on the idea that a god of morality has dictated what is right and wrong to the universe, and a sort of morality is written into the cosmos by this creator of the universe. This is seen in almost all religions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and many others have this form of religious objective morality. Now, the common secular counterpoint to this argument, or this form of morality, is generally moral relativism. This is the idea that morality is generally a construct created by the culture in which you are raised. For example, if you are raised in the Islamic world, you will generally think it's wrong for women to walk outside of their homes uncovered. So being raised in a specific culture, being told what is right and what is wrong, you have no basis for any other type of morality. Therefore, according to the moral relativists, there is no basis for us to say that they are wrong about morality, because morality is constructed by culture. Therefore, our culture tells us humans are equal to one another and we should choose our own paths in life, yet their culture says something else. Because their culture raises them in a certain way means we have no place to tell them that they are wrong. This is generally the basis for moral relativism. Now, I think both of these two mainstream ideas on morality are incorrect, and I actually have a third path for us to choose. But first, I'll go into these arguments a little bit more in depth. First off is religious moral objectivism. So to have objective morality means there are right and wrong answers to moral questions. Doing something is either right, wrong, or morally neutral. Religious morality is generally dictated by a divine creator, or a book or text this divine creator has allegedly written. Now, there are obviously problems with this. An objective system of morality has to be based on something that is objectively true. And religious morality generally is based on a whole tower and list of things, each of which are not objectively true, or at least wholly unsubstantiated by any evidence whatsoever. For example, for religious morality to make sense, first you need to know a God exists. Then you need to know what kind of God this is. Is this a God of morality? Does this God care about what human beings do? One species of ape on a planet in an insignificant part of the cosmos. Does this God care about what we do? Then, is this God a God of a specific religion? Has he given us scriptures or instructions on how to live? Which religion is this God a God of? So once you've answered all these questions somehow, objectively, you'll need to know that this book the creator of the universe has supposedly written is in fact written or inspired by the creator of the universe. And even when, or if, you can get to this point, you then have no basis to reject anything in that book. While many people who believe in religious morality reject many of the moral prescriptions that exist within these books. This is how you know there's a clear problem with objective religious morality. But to make sure I'm not taking these people out of context, here is a short video by Dennis Prager from Prager University.
But what photographs could you show? What measurements could you provide that prove that murder or rape or theft is wrong? The fact is, you can't. There are scientific facts, but without God, there are no moral facts. In a secular world, there can only be opinions about morality. They may be personal opinions or society's opinions, but only opinions. Every atheist philosopher I have read or debated on this subject has acknowledged that if there is no God, there is no objective morality. Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is murder wrong. Otherwise, all morality is opinion. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
So that certainly was interesting. As his main philosophical point, he uses, without a God of morality, murder cannot be wrong. Many people will have problems with this, obviously, because there are many ways to rationalize how we should not murder someone, or how murder in some ways is wrong. What Dennis Prager is saying is that if morality isn't written into the fabric of the universe by the creator of the universe, a creator of the universe who specifically cares about what we do, then there can be no morality. This is what he's saying, and I understand his point. From making this point, he goes on to say that we should be following Judeo-Christian morality. While many of the moral prescriptions found within the Bible can be projected onto modern society, modern Western society, I think Dennis Prager goes too far in saying that Judeo-Christian morality is the basis for Western culture. Because much of the progress of Western culture has not been because of Judaism and Christianity, but rather in spite of it. One of the examples Dennis Prager often uses to show that Judeo-Christian morality is the best is that societies based on Judeo-Christian morality are the only societies to have abolished slavery. This on the surface seems like a point that makes sense. Yet, the Bible, in both the New and Old Testaments, clearly prescribes that it is allowed to hold slaves. It gives instructions on holding slaves. Therefore, Judeo-Christian morality cannot be held up as the reason why slavery was abolished. And as I said before, even if murder is not wrong, if it is not prescribed by a God of morality, religious morality can only be true if the specific religion is shown to be objectively true. There's no reason to believe in this religious morality if there is no evidence that the religion creating the morality is true. That's the basic problem with religious morality, and specifically Judeo-Christian morality. Now, the second of the two mainstream views on morality is moral relativism. This is generally held up by the secular left as the great rebuttal to religious morality. This is clearly a problem to me. The reason why is that anyone who holds up the claim that morality at its base must be relative has no basis for criticizing any other moral actions. They have no basis to say that throwing acid in the faces of women in the Middle East who blaspheme against Allah is wrong. And while they so easily and often criticize the political and moral ideas of those on the political right and conservatives, they have no basis for this either. Because if culture and societies are the things that breed morality, and therefore you have no basis to say that someone else is wrong about a moral question, you also have no basis for saying someone else, even in the next room, is wrong about morality. These are the problems with being able to say that there are no right and wrong answers to questions of morality. Because when you say there are no right and wrong answers to these questions, you have no basis to improve society. Because you have no reasons to improve society. Because there is nothing wrong with society morally. This is the problem with moral relativism. But to make sure I am not misconstruing the views of moral relativists, here's a short clip from an atheist YouTube channel, Cosmic Skeptic, by Alex Oconnor.
Post because on his website he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children, and obviously that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because Firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality. Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared,
Right.
every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective.
Right, sure.
Some people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
So
that's
tar,
a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. But that's no problem, right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality is subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
See, I think when
it
we
doesn't make a difference.
Now again, I obviously have many problems with what he says here, because when you say that there are no right and wrong answers to morality, you can't criticize someone else's moral beliefs. This is what many atheists seem to do. They first say morality is relative, and then afterwards, they go on to say, you are wrong about morality, speaking about religious dogma and theocracy and conservatism, but in reality, based on their views about morality, they have no basis to make these criticisms, nor an intelligent way to really get at the moral problems that we're facing in the world. Moral relativism and religious morality seems like two separate ways to come to incorrect conclusions about how we should live in the world. Religious morality makes conclusions based off of a series of unsubstantiated conclusions that are meant to be taken on faith. This is not an adequate method to figure out truly what is right and wrong, because all of the assumptions that lead up to the conclusions are not substantiated or supported. On the other hand, moral relativism will lead to a world of confusion. Nothing can be seen as wrong in a world where morality is truly relative, because even communist or fascist or theocratic regimes cannot be criticized on a moral basis by someone who claims that morality is relative, or in other words, that there are no right and wrong answers to questions of morality. These both are clearly not the correct paths to go down if we truly want to know how to live in this world as individuals and as societies. Now, apart from these two more mainstream methods of approaching questions of morality, I think there's a third approach that is not only more intellectually honest, but perhaps more in accordance with the reality of conscious experience. Morality is fundamentally based on what we decide holds value. And all we need to have a secular objective morality is to agree that conscious experience is what holds value. This is that suffering, negative experience, is morally negative, and positive experience, or well-being, is what we should strive to increase in the world, on an individual level, on a societal level, and on a civilizational level. Perhaps the most prominent moral philosopher who has spoken out on this specific issue is Sam Harris, who wrote a book entitled The Moral Landscape. In his mind, morality should be a sort of landscape with peaks and valleys, in which the peaks correspond to the highest states of societal and civilizational well-being, and the valleys are the lowest depths of suffering. Now, this is a hypothetical landscape, but what Sam Harris is proposing is that if we simply study how cultures, how governments, how individual actions affect well-being and suffering on all these different levels and across time, we can form an objective science of morality in which we try to improve well-being and decrease suffering in the world. Here's a short clip from a TED Talk Sam Harris gave a number of years ago on his book, The Moral Landscape.
I'm going to speak today about the relationship between science and human values. Now, it's generally understood that questions of morality, questions of good and evil and right and wrong, are questions about which science officially has no opinion. It's thought that science can help us get what we value, but it can never tell us what we ought to value. And consequently, most people, I think most people probably here, think that science will never answer the most important questions in human life. Questions like, what is worth living for? What is worth dying for? What constitutes a good life? So I'm going to argue that this is an illusion, that the separation between science and human values is an illusion, and actually quite a dangerous one at this point in human history. Now, it's often said that science cannot give us a foundation for morality and human values because science deals with facts, and facts and values seem to belong to different spheres. It's often thought that there's no description of the way the world is that can tell us how the world ought to be. But I think this is quite clearly untrue. But values are a certain kind of fact. They are facts about the well-being of conscious creatures. Why is it that we don't have ethical obligations toward rocks? Why don't we feel compassion for rocks? It's because we don't think rocks can suffer. And if we're more concerned about our fellow primates than we are about insects, as indeed we are, it's because we think they're exposed to a greater range of potential happiness and suffering. Now, the crucial thing to notice here is that this is a factual claim. This is something we could be right or wrong about. I mean, if we've misconstrued the relationship between biological complexity and the possibilities of experience, well, then we could be wrong about the inner lives of insects. Okay, and there is no notion, no version of human morality and human values that I've ever come across that is not at some point reducible to a concern about conscious experience and its possible changes. I mean, even if you get your values from religion, even if you think that good and evil ultimately relate to conditions after death, either to an eternity of happiness with God or an eternity of suffering in hell, you are still concerned about consciousness and its changes. And to say that such changes can persist after death is itself a factual claim, which, of course, may or may not be true. Now, to speak about the conditions of well-being in this life for human beings, we know that there's a continuum of such facts. We know that it's possible to live in a failed state, where everything that can go wrong does go wrong, where mothers cannot feed their children, where strangers cannot find the basis for peaceful collaboration, where people are murdered indiscriminately. And we know that it's possible to move along this continuum towards something quite a bit more idyllic, I mean, to a place where a conference like this is even conceivable. And we know that there are right and wrong answers to how to move in this space. Would adding cholera to the water be a good idea? Well, probably not. Would it be a good idea for everyone to believe in the evil eye so that when bad things happen to them, they immediately blame their neighbors? Probably not. There are truths to be known about how human communities flourish, whether or not we understand these truths. And morality relates to these truths. So in talking about values, we are talking about facts. Now, of course, our situation in the world can be understood at many levels. There's from the level of the genome on up to the level of economic systems and political arrangements. But if we're going to talk about human well-being, we are of necessity talking about the human brain, because we know that our experience of the world and of ourselves within it is realized in the brain, whatever happens after death. Even if the suicide bomber does get 72 virgins in the afterlife, in this life, his personality, his rather unfortunate personality, is the product of his brain. Okay, and so the contributions of culture, if culture changes us, as indeed it does, it changes us by changing our brains. And so therefore, whatever cultural variation there is in how human beings flourish can, at least in principle, be understood in the context of a maturing science of the mind, neuroscience, psychology, etc. And I think of this as a kind of moral landscape with peaks and valleys that correspond to differences in the well-being of conscious creatures, both personal and collective. And one thing to notice is that Perhaps there are states of human well-being that we rarely access, that few people access, and these await our discovery. Perhaps some of these states can be appropriately called mystical or spiritual. Perhaps there are other states that we can't access because of how our minds are structured, but other minds possibly could access them.
Now you may be wondering, why is conscious experience what we should value? Why is this objectively what should be the basis for our morality? This is a basic question usually said in response to books like The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris, in which he basically takes it as an assumption that well-being is good and suffering is bad, and this should be the basis of morality. Here's my philosophical argument for why suffering and well-being should be taken as the basis of our modern morality. 1. Either things have value or they don't. This seems a fairly simple assumption to make. An example that can be easily understood by someone in society is that a coin in the United States has value where perhaps a piece of tree bark does not have value. This is obviously an example placed in the context of human society, but I believe this extends to the universe as a whole. Either objects have value or they don't. Now, some people will argue that nothing has value. These are nihilists, and they do have an argument for that position. But even these people who say that nothing has value would agree with this statement. Either things have value or they don't. 2. Objects that are not conscious objectively cannot have value unless they relate to conscious creatures. Imagine a universe with no conscious creatures, therefore nothing to be experienced. This is a dead universe in which there is nothing conscious to prescribe value onto objects. Consciousness, by its very nature of experiencing the world around us, is what denotes value onto objects and onto creatures. This logic seems to extend to the world at large. People have value because 1, they are experiencing the world, and 2, we experience them. Conscious creatures denote value onto people, themselves, and objects around them. A rock has no value unless it relates to a conscious creature, for example, a diamond ring. There is a reason why we treat animals differently from tree stumps. Conscious experience and consciousness matters to morality and what we value. Therefore, 3, the existence of consciousness merits that conscious creatures are the only things that can have value, and therefore that we should value. This was already partially explained. A universe without any consciousness cannot have any value because there can be no positive or negative events within that universe. Yet, if you place a consciousness within that universe, that consciousness can experience positive and negative things. 4. Morality is about good and bad, right and wrong. This is the traditional definition of the term, and it is how we define morality, good and bad, right and wrong. This statement doesn't need much support, because it is simply the definition of the term. 5. The synonyms of good and bad relating to conscious experience are well-being and suffering. This seems fairly simple. Consciousness, or conscious experience rather, can be good or bad. Generally, our words for good conscious experience lasting over time is well-being, and negative conscious experience is suffering. Therefore, good is well-being, and bad is suffering. And 6. Conscious experience being the only thing that can have value, suffering and well-being are, objectively, what we should value, and what a science of morality should be based on. Now, hopefully you followed me through that step-by-step process of coming to this conclusion. Now, this is clearly very different from these two mainstream ideas about morality we have in society. It's different from religious morality because it's actually based on something objectively true. Consciousness does exist. We know this through our own experience. Consciousness is what denotes value on things in the universe and in ourselves. Therefore, a science of morality should be based on good and bad conscious experience. This is only logical. It's also different from the position of moral relativism because it can actually determine right and wrong answers to questions of morality. Now, what does it mean to have a science of morality. People like Jordan Peterson have critiqued this idea by saying it sounds very authoritarian. It's not, and I'll explain why. Of course, every scientific idea must be questioned, and it must be questioned to be based in reality. A science of morality wouldn't be forcing people to do specific things, but rather determining the best ways to maximize well-being and decrease suffering. Science doesn't necessarily tell us what we should do, but rather what is true. And a science of morality would be telling us what is true about how to do these things, about how to maximize well-being and how to maximize suffering. And ultimately, it would be the best path, in my opinion, for our societies to go down. The story of human beings have brought us through many twists and turns throughout history, and we've always searched for what is right and what is wrong. And in my opinion, our conclusion should be, after all these years, that we as individuals, as groups, as families, as societies, as countries, and as a civilization should be focused primarily on increasing well-being and decreasing suffering. Hello, I am Kendall Butler. I hope you enjoyed that video. Links to the moral landscape and other ideas on morality, including the videos by Alex Oconnor and Dennis Prager, are below. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a nice day.